By imperceptibly small developer-sized studios' own admission, Eternights takes heavy inspiration from the Persona series, and likely draws on the mechanics and systems of harem dating games like Sakura Wars as well. However, it also perhaps overzealously commits to its confidant bonding and dating sim roots, because the entirety of my roughly 20 hours with Eternights felt like I was embroiled in an unruly, tumultuous love affair, the kind with an ex-romantic partner that I was still helplessly enthralled by, which likewise repeatedly made me wish I had the conviction to just call things off for good and move on with my life already. In an almost uncanny similarity to that cliché, ill-advised, but irresistibly passionate post-relationship dynamic, Eternights' frustratingly faulty and ungratifying combat and somewhat baffling system and narrative choices must have made me internally question my decision to continue investing my time and effort at least a dozen times throughout my playthrough. And yet, Eternights had the enticing charm and exceptional allure to keep bringing me back, even if that was arguably to my own detriment. It's a game that is unquestionably an ardent labor of love, from a developer who has clearly put an extensive amount of effort and dedication into realizing their vision. It's a shame then that Eternights features frustratingly deficient combat that's difficult for all the wrong reasons, and makes some inexplicably obtuse choices during its final act, which render hours of the player's prior investment virtually useless. It has all the makings of a cult classic, and will undoubtedly find its niche among the most avid of JRPG fans, who are willing to suffer through the likes of Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, and who appreciate the pageantry, history, and intense difficulty of Final Fantasy Origin: Stranger of Paradise. But for those simply wanting to experience a fun and enjoyable game, which pays homage to Persona 5 and Catherine Full Body by prominently featuring romantic developments between you and your in-game counterparts, you may want to give Eternights plenty of time to go work on itself before committing to any type of relationship with it. Let's start with the good, the honeymoon phase, if you will. The art direction is absolutely oozing in intrigue and atmosphere. There's a hazy, euphoric glow reminiscent of a once voltaic neon metropolis juxtaposed to the dark, ominous shadows of uninhabited buildings, lifeless street alleys, and foreboding corridors. The enemy design is varied and intensely captivating, boasting grotesque monstrosities that are also somehow aesthetically beautiful and pleasing enough to practically be an art sculpture displayed in a lavish gallery. Character models are minimalistically cartoonish, yet somehow exceptionally emotive and lively. Speaking of characters, your apocalypse-conquering counterparts are all unique and compelling individuals, and the voice acting for all of them is fantastic, with the notable standout being the protagonist's longtime best friend, Chani, who serves as the almost always refreshing comic relief throughout the various dire circumstances your motley crew must overcome.
Dude, we stole a lot of porn from my grandpa. I'll burn it all, don't worry.
Cutscenes are almost entirely voiced, with stellar performances across the board, and with practically zero temptation to ever skip ahead. Not even one of the characters here feels stiff or unremarkable. In the best possible way, I found it exacting to carefully consider how I would choose to allocate my time with each of them, and whom I wanted to grow most intimately close to, given that all of the characters had compelling reasons for me to want to do so. Forging bonds with each respective character granted access to new and potent abilities. Each character offered a distinctly unique benefit, should you elect to either form a lasting bond of platonic friendship, or perhaps take your bond to the next level by making things a little more physical. Almost every character has a well-conveyed and thoroughly developed backstory, which provides context into their motivations, along with the emotions and doubt that they are struggling with in this brave new world. From a storytelling and narrative standpoint, there's rarely a misstep, and I found myself deeply empathizing with the often traumatic experiences of the close friends that I was surrounding myself with. An abundantly large part of me wishes that developer Psy Studios had simply set out to create an intricately crafted visual novel-style dating game. Were that the case, I would be championing the cause for Eternights to receive the highest marks available, because as far as those elements of the game are concerned, there is very little left to be desired. Instead, in perhaps an overly ambitious move, Psy has opted to make a hardcore action game of all things. Yes, like I said, Eternights is a hardcore action game, where you will die, and die again, often to frustratingly unempowering game mechanics that will make you feel cheated out of the chance for progress and gratification. Eternights is by all accounts a wolf in sheep's clothing, with the character relationships and jovial camaraderie serving as a disguise for the underbelly that requires the player to exert an immense and exhaustive effort to develop split-second reflexes and memorize tells and patterns of various enemy types in order to capitalize on frustratingly finite windows during which you can attack the enemy. To be clear, I rather love and enjoy games with punishing difficulty like Dark Souls, Nioh, or Lies of P, so long as that difficulty is crafted around fair and engaging combat mechanics that will push you to your limits, but still warrant a fair chance of success. On normal or expert difficulty, Eternights instead features a system bankrupt enough of any feasible chance to prevail that it practically amounts to an inadvertent form of player bullying. During combat, there's a pink indicator accompanied by a sound cue, which almost infuriatingly occurs a mere blink of an eye before an enemy lands its attack. The game tells me that I'm supposed to react to it and either dodge or parry, but the window is so laughably small that this actually felt like a form of gaslighting, as I continued to take hit after hit after hit, diligently attempting to acclimate to this system. What's worse is that the perfect dodge state that results from accurately predicting when enemies will attack is nothing less than the cornerstone of the entire combat system in Eternights.
Yes!
It lends a brief window of invulnerability without which the player can rarely ever complete a single combo finisher on an enemy. Logistically speaking, Eternights offers an artificial form of difficulty by building its entire combat system around a flawed and frustrating mechanic that is not only functionally deficient, but also serves to ruin the player's fun when they inevitably cannot react to the given indicator in the infinitesimal window of time provided. After hours and hours of bashing my head against enemy after enemy, I eventually resorted to attempting to predict when an enemy would attack on pure instinct and split-second pattern recognition before the indicator had even shown, and I had considerably more success. This is simply not how combat mechanics of a game should be designed. When the game later offered a parry skill after hours of gameplay, which I could purchase for an allocation of points, and then attempt to activate in an even shorter window of time, I may have mumbled a choice few expletives under my breath before electing to enjoy yet another lovely and welcome excursion from combat with one of my far more interesting companions. I understand that Psy Studios is comprised of less people than I can count on one hand, but since that's the case, why did it make the inexplicable decision to attempt to design and deliver on a combat system that can prove challenging to execute for even seasoned developers? The bottom line is that Eternights doesn't get a pass for having hours upon hours of frustrating defective combat just because the game comes from a small studio, when other indie studios have already set the bar for combat mechanics by which it can be measured and found disastrously wanting.
The developers did absolutely no research for this.
In spite of all of my aforementioned combat woes, by the final third of the game, I was considerably invested in my relationships with the various characters. Barring one I had elected to remain mere acquaintances with, mostly because the abilities they offered weren't ones I coveted, but also because personality and interest-wise, I found them to be the least compelling to a marginal extent. Alternatively, the game told me I should forge a maximum intimacy or intensity bond with at least one of my counterparts. After some conflicted waffling, I elected to have my protagonist become romantically involved with Yuna, a K-pop idol with a pure heart who had been at my side for longer than any of my other companions, save for Chani. I likewise formed an unbreakable bond of friendship with Min, a shy but athletically capable cross-country runner with a quirky but also plucky demeanor. The in-game benefits of these relationships were the ability to withstand a singular blow which would have meant my death, courtesy of Min, along with my protagonist's fervent lover Yuna being able to resurrect him from the brink of death should Min's protective effort fail. Since these abilities are locked behind relationship strength tiers, acquiring them took hours, and I wasn't really able to put them to use or enjoyment until the game's penultimate act. But that's when, to my bewilderment, the game decided to pair me up exclusively with the one companion I had elected not to forge any type of bond with at all, for almost the entirety of the act, without the companions and abilities that I invested so much time and effort into. Fine, whatever, we get through that and make do. I eagerly anticipated having my two closest companions at my side, with all of my powers at my disposal for the final leg of the game. Except, that's when the game made the even more baffling decision to remove my closest confidant from my party entirely, for virtually the rest of the game. I understand that narratively this was an attempt to delve into themes of loss and the significance of our loved ones to us, but explicitly asking me to invest actual hours of game time into a particular character so that bond with them will be strong, and purportedly I will have access to unique and satisfying combat abilities, only to remove that character entirely and render that investment useless before I even have the chance to enjoy it? That's well beyond infuriating. I have no idea what possessed Psy Studios to make this decision, but it's nothing short of a contemptuous invalidation of their players' invested time and effort in undoing a more than substantial amount of leveling and progress from the course of the entire game. What was the point of leveling up my bond with that character then? Why do you think it's okay to play an Uno reverse and say to the player, sorry, better luck next time when you might get to have fun? I could have gone back to a prior save and manipulated the game into taking another character whose combat benefits I was willing to part with. But the fact that I would even have to do that is beyond incomprehensible. Oh, and as a bonus, there's a level where you just get no weapons. Yeah, that's a thing. You just have to run around without your weapon anymore because plot reasons? I don't know, this game is really something else at times. Eternights really is a tale of two games. The one where I made gratifying connections with a compelling cast of characters, a game which rivals the likes of narrative adventure games such as Life is Strange, Road 96, and Goodbye Volcano High in terms of compelling and meaningful interactions with its enjoyable cast, which would also be in the upper echelon of visual novel games such as Steins Gate, Code Realize, and Doki Doki Literature Club. The second other game is the one that I have to keep playing if I want to also be able to enjoy that first one. Being forced to bounce between the two feels like an unhealthy cycle, and because of how good the narrative, character-based elements of Eternights are, it's likely not a cycle I'm soon to break. I'm probably going to pull up the PlayStation trophy list to see if I'm close enough to the platinum to put myself through all of this again. Perhaps that's the video game equivalent of checking your ex's Instagram, just to make sure they're definitely still single. And I guess, for a game about passionate romantic relationships, which may or may not lead to your untimely demise, I suppose that is all too fitting.
You lost, but you put up a fight. That should be celebrated. That should be cheered.
For more honest reviews, please consider subscribing to the channel. We did receive a code for Eternights, and that is something that I just wouldn't have even imagined was possible mere months ago. It's because of you all who have subscribed that I'm able to do this, and I appreciate your support oh so much for that reason. Thanks so much for watching, you guys, and I hope to see you all in the next review.